Welcome to Fort Worth 148's podcast, where we meet to discuss Masonic topics and strive to build value in the Brotherhood. The opinions and statements of the participants do not represent any positions or stance of any Grand Lodge or Lodge and are solely the viewpoints of the participants. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. This is Rhit Moore, past master and current secretary of Fort Worth 148.
This is Billy Hamilton, senior steward for 148.
And this is Gabriel Jagush, master mason with Fort Worth 148.
I guess I should start throwing in there, maybe I'm secretary of Tarrant Lodge as well now. I've recently been nominated for that position.
Congratulations, or my condolences? I don't know. Right? I feel like being nominated for secretary is not a congratulations.
No, it was one of those things that, the guy that was doing secretary got thrown into it, and it's a tough position to wrap your head around. And they were like, we need help. And
okay.
I couldn't refuse. Fair. They're good brothers. And that's the thing. They're giving me a ton of help over there, and they're eager to learn. So, really eager to build their lodge, so I couldn't turn it down.
Yeah. Oh, you just wanted to.
Now, I actually did have a question. I did have a question about that. Is there anything in the Grand Lodge laws that talks about being an officer at two different lodges?
Yes. If I'm not mistaken, you can't be worshipful master of two different lodges that meet on the same night, I think. Ooh, okay. I'm going to have to refresh myself before I start talking out my rear, but there is something in there specific that you can't serve in a position at the same time. I think with the caveat on the same night.
Yeah, because okay. I think I know a couple of guys who have done worshipful out at two different lodges at once.
Yeah, as long as they're not same night, I think. But definitely look that up if that's something you're going to run into. If you're senior warden of two lodges.
Yeah, well, if you're going to be worshipful at two lodges at once, like Godspeed, regardless.
Oh, no doubt. But you couldn't progress in the lineup anyway if you were meeting on the same night. How would that work in the first place? So
creatively, I don't know.
But yeah, there's something in there I remember. I just don't exactly remember what it says. There's so much law.
Yeah. Okay, so dear listeners, we are going to introduce you to what I'm going to call our holiday format. And our holiday format is going to consist primarily, not necessarily, but primarily of shorter 30 to 45-minute episodes done in a roundtable format. Our discussion questions section will be the entirety of the podcast episodes during the last half of November and all of December. This is because all of us have families, we have commitments, things are already kind of crazy, and we want to preserve our own sanity while still providing y'all with content. And some people have told me that they really enjoy the discussion question section of the podcast, so we figured that instead of bringing y'all heavy episodes that have been cut in half and then kind of rationed, it's more fair to bring y'all discussion questions for the last half of November and month of December. That way, y'all can get your fix and we can still provide you good content.
Exactly. I know I've had Masonic activities 4 to sometimes 6 days a week, the last 5 weeks, nonstop. And
my girlfriend is starting to start
slowing her down a little bit.
Yeah.
As much as I love the podcast, it's time to recharge and spend a little time with the family at the holidays.
Family? What's that? All right. But so I figured we'd get launch right into it, and I wanted to start with a doozy of a question. So.
Yeah, fire away. This one looks long.
By the way, listeners, some of you may notice a good chunk of these are shamelessly stolen from the Freemasonry subreddit. So I'm just going to fess up to that right now. But they're good for food for thought. So, first question. Okay, so I've been given 2 offers to join the local Freemasons, and admittedly I turned them down, but I'm seriously considering them. I'd like to join, but my biggest fear is that I wouldn't be able to live up to the expectations of the fraternity. I get that if things don't mesh well, I can always walk away, but I don't feel comfortable with becoming a disappointment. Firstly, I've been a modestly active member of the community, doing things like Boy Scouts of America, college-level student senate, and other kinds of volunteering. But I'm also considered a loner and awkward. Second, because of dues, I have, quote-unquote, chosen to live in poverty. I'd rather volunteer than work as a 9-to-5 slave. I have a pretty happy life, and honestly, I don't feel I need more, but I also don't have the extra money. And finally, and more recently, I've had legal trouble. For the next 3 years or so, I'll be considered a felon while I fulfill my obligation of probation. I used some very vulgar language and got stuck with terroristic threats, in addition to a previous contempt of the court conviction. Point is, what would you folks recommend? Should I petition to join? Can I even be considered? Can I afford it? What else should I know before I make this decision? Anyway, thanks.
Wow. That one got loaded at the end.
Yeah, a little bit.
Right.
And I apologize to the person. This question was deleted by the person who posted it, and I apologize to the person who posted it because I was laughing while reading this question. But it's like,
Right. I mean, there's several red flags in here that I would question. First of all, is this person necessarily a good candidate? Because I mean, the felony part is probably the most obvious issue that I have. Yeah, and then I mean the whole terroristic threats. Like, if it was me and I was looking to guard the West Gate, I would seriously not be down with this.
Yeah.
So let's look at that question and let's cut that part off, because terroristic threats. I mean, what lodge would let that guy in their right mind? You know what I mean? A felon that was a felon because of terroristic threats.
Right.
So
Okay.
do you want to just delete everything going forwards from, and finally and more recently I've had legal trouble, and then just leave in the active member of the community, chosen to live in poverty, that kind of thing, loner and awkward?
Well, I do want to touch on the felon here in a second too, but if it was basically, because if you take that part out, the only thing really was the poverty deal, right? I mean, because everything else looked good except for not being able to afford dues.
He was kind of concerned about being a loner and awkward, but I feel like that's his concern, not necessarily ours.
Right.
The other thing that kind of stuck out to me was that he'd been given 2 offers to join the local Freemasons, which sounded kind of off. But I know that sometimes people, in Texas, we are allowed to provide a neutrally worded suggestion that a person would be a good fit for the fraternity.
Yeah.
I know that in some states you can actually ask people to join, but generally speaking, you are not allowed to recruit. So that kind of stuck out as like
No, that is kind of a red flaggy there. But if a guy like this came up to lodge minus the felon thing, I wouldn't have a problem of considering him. But when it came down to the part of him being able to afford it, that's a big part.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the way I look at it is, if you can't afford to pay dues, and this is a conversation that I had with somebody outside of this question. It was a totally different question. Somebody was talking about, I'm a young guy, I'm a young professional, don't have a lot of money laying around, and my local lodge, I was looking into joining my local lodge, but then I found out that the total petition fee was like $450. They're talking entered apprentice, Fellcraft masters, right? The petition fees. And I said, actually, that's pretty reasonable, for total petition fees. And he was like, what do you mean it's totally reasonable? This is unaffordable. This is, masonry is only targeting older guys, because who, what young professional can afford that? And at that point I said, man, I'm 26. Like, what do you want? You know?
Yeah.
And I'm a young professional. And I know that a lot of people can't afford that. But if you can't afford that, then you shouldn't be looking at masonry because you have other financial obligations to look at.
Well, and it may come down to a matter of prioritization, right? How you prioritize your finances. Because how many people subscribe to Loot Crate? And if you look at the amount you spend over a year for Loot Crate,
how much is Loot Crate per month?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I guess it's a matter of, are you willing to prioritize those finances for masonry at this time? Or are you more interested in doing, sometimes you can't, but if you can, some people choose to spend it elsewhere.
Yeah. No, and I had that discussion with him, and he was like, wow, that's absurd, and I went, that's not absurd. You just have really crap priorities, but whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, part of what we're doing is contributing to society in one way or another. And, if you don't have the excess income to, donate money, we donate time as Masons because we can afford to. But if you get cut out of all of those, it's just not the right group.
Yeah.
You're going to need to get those lessons elsewhere, because we're not giving them away for free, or shouldn't be giving them away for that cheap because of what we do on the back end of that degrees. Is all we did was degrees, sure, give them away for free, but we do a lot more than that.
And let's be real here. Making masonry, paying the bills, it's not cheap.
Right.
So
that's exactly right.
And kind of the way I look at it too is, if you can't afford either the time or the money, then you definitely have things that should take priority in your life until you can get to a place where you can afford to spend the time and money on something extra.
Yeah.
That's it. You know what I mean?
At that point, I would say take $30, buy a copy of the Bible, and buy a book on meditation, and then use that until you can afford to pay dues.
Yeah, I mean, because
maybe I'm a little bit cynical about it, but come on.
No, I mean, because it's not that expensive. But you're exactly right. You're going to get those lessons out of there, and by the time you get a promotion at work, you can afford it and come to masonry and share that with people.
Yeah, but of course, we're also talking about people who, we're talking about maybe misplaced priorities. We're talking about people who maybe can't afford it just because of their work situation. But then, we also look at the person that chooses to live in poverty, and I think that becomes a very different sort of discussion as well. Mm-hmm. Because clearly, you are operating without the traditional framework of what a traditional career looks like or anything like that. But it's not necessarily compatible. And being incompatible isn't a bad thing, but it just means that you're not compatible. And so your lodge may not be well served by picking up somebody who chooses to live in poverty, and you may not get a lot of mileage out of that. So,
And to me, it's the same thing as if you want to join the sailing club and you don't have a boat. I mean, what's the point? And that may seem crass when we're talking about a job, but if you're not employed, you're just not that compatible with Freemasonry. If you can barely sustain your own self, what we do and teach in Freemasonry is not going to be super beneficial.
Especially if you are choosing to avoid employment. If you are actively choosing to avoid employment, that really does go against a lot of the values of industry and everything like that we teach. And now, to be fair, this person is talking about, rather volunteering than working as a 9-to-5 slave, that kind of thing. But generally speaking, to bring back the felon thing, to combine, choosing to live into poverty with all these legal troubles that this person is having, I really don't think that this person is volunteering that hard in conjunction with their other issues going on. This does not strike me as somebody who is living in poverty because they have chosen to volunteer every day 8 hours a day at the soup kitchen, This strikes me as maybe like a homeless crust punk, Very, very reminiscent of the when I lived in New Orleans and some of the characters that I met there. So.
Oh yeah, some of the gutter punks for sure.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the importance of investigating to where, minus the felony, if you get to know this guy and then realize he's living a life of poverty by choice, you got to understand that it's just not that compatible with Freemasonry. But, then when you dig deeper and find out he's a felon for terroristic threats, I don't see how you could possibly reason that into a positive vote.
No, not at all. And and
he also mentions previous contempt of court convictions, which is usually when you lie in the courtroom. So I mean that's a conflict there too.
Yeah, either that or you just can't keep an order. What are you gonna do with that? I don't know.
No. Yeah, that's a big no. But let me ask you this, because in Texas, it is legal to initiate a felon. But if you are a Mason and you become a felon, you get kicked out instantly. But
honestly, when that whole thing came up for the Grand Lodge vote to ban guys or to ban initiating anybody that had been convicted of a felony of, what was it? It was very specifically felonies related to sexual assault and that kind of thing. Like, I was amazed that didn't pass,
No, well, it was illegal.
Was it just felonies?
Up until last year, it was illegal for like 3 or 4 years to initiate a felon, period. And then that got overturned.
Which,
they should now they were
that.
They were just talking about this at the leadership course down in Corpus Christi, that if one of your brothers becomes a felon, you're supposed to file a Form 2 on them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, because they get expelled immediately. There's no pass go, you go straight to jail kind of thing. There's not a trial involved in that. You go straight to expulsion. But the question I wanted to ask, is there a scenario that you could ever see yourself voting affirmative for a felon?
It would have to have, this guy would have had to commit, he would have had to have committed the felonies literally decades ago and had a stellar track record from then on. I really can't see myself voting positively for a felon unless it has been literally decades since they've committed the felony.
Right. No. People can change, but I would have to have some kind of, no doubt in my mind that this person is not the same person who committed those felonies.
Yeah. And I think it does really come down to the fact of what the felony is. And I say that very lightly because, if you're getting hit with a felony, it's usually because you did something horrible to somebody else. You lied, you cheated, you beat somebody, something horrible.
And somebody brought up the example of what if you shot a pigeon and then, or not a pigeon, what if you shot a seagull and you got slammed with a felony, right? My response to that was, I still don't care. Ignorance of the law is no excuse, and why the hell would you shoot a seagull anyway,
No, and that was because I've heard kind of the same example and have even used it, to where if someone inadvertently killed a seagull and somehow got a felony and there was some way to verify all this, which is like lightning striking twice.
Yeah, it's the most strikingly extrapolated what if
you
scenario.
Got it.
And it's not going to happen. That's not real. Quit kidding yourself.
Mm-hmm. So,
nonsense.
that's why I say, just accept the fact that if they've got a felony on there, it's not a good idea to let them in our craft. I mean,
absolutely,
you may be such good friends with them and they're totally, revamped as far as you think, but to bring them in for your brothers that don't know them from Adam,
it's
not to mention law enforcement, because a lot of law enforcement, if not all of them, I don't know the exact rule, can't fraternize with
they're not
felons.
allowed to associate with felons.
Yeah, right. They can't associate with felons. So, bring in one felon, lose all the police officers in your lodge. What? How can you justify that?
Yeah. Well, and so and I told this person because this was an online comment, right? And I told this person, and I'm going to be clear here. I'm not violating Texas Masonic law because I'm not disclosing my vote on a specific candidate. I'm just talking about a general candidate. I told this person I would blackball you in a heartbeat. Don't even bother. Right? Like, obviously they're not applying to our lodge or anything like that. But if somebody like that came to our lodge and was like, terroristic threats, boom, blackball. No questions. Like, I'm not even going to bother.
No, and that would be one that you would want to blackball. Like, don't not accept their petition. Take that petition and put it on record that this guy shouldn't be a Mason. Because if I get a petition that a guy's been blackballed at another lodge, you better believe I'm paying that lodge a visit if I can. Yeah. At the very least, calling them.
Well, you tell the DDGM, honestly. Like, and have the DDGM tell the local lodges, like, hey, like, by the way, this person may come by to your lodge. Here's the lowdown.
Yeah.
And I know there are a lot, especially, out in the country, there are a lot of smaller lodges that are having real membership issues. But in a case like this, I think it can't be enough of an issue that you would want to accept someone that you wouldn't normally accept, even if you had a completely full lodge.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you get one bad apple in there and it'll start rotting the whole thing. So you have to be careful on justifying the means, for the end.
So, in short, dear listeners, this guy would probably not get in. Hopefully.
No, that's a great example of somebody that if he walked in your door and you gave him a petition, you would never know that stuff and you'd be dealing with it. But if you just wait at least 3 months before and make sure he comes up on a regular basis to get to know him, not just give him a petition, make him wait, get to know him, preferably 6 months to 8 months, you're going to know all that and you'll know how to vote accordingly.
Yeah. So moving on to the next question. Rhit, what is the difference between irregular and clandestine?
Man, has this not been a hot topic on Texas Freemasons?
It has.
Anytime somebody posts something about Prince Hall, it seems like, 300 to 400 comments about, they're clandestine. Even some people say they were clandestine. And there's a difference. There's irregular and clandestine. Clandestine means they never had any kind of ties to Freemasonry. They just popped up and said, hey, we're Freemasons, we do Freemason stuff, and have no claim to what we do. Irregular means that they have a claim, but aren't exactly in line with things. A good example is George Washington. He was initiated as an irregular Mason.
Yeah.
And it was eventually rectified to where he became a regular Mason.
Yeah, I like to joke around that George Washington is my favorite clandy Mason, but he wasn't clandestine.
No, wasn't clandestine.
Just irregular.
Prince Hall is another good example of being irregular, or used to be. Now they are regular, recognized, and we're even taking further steps there. But before we recognized them, I think 7-8 years ago, they were irregular to where they had a claim and a charter that went all the way back to the Grand Lodge of England, like it's supposed to.
Fair,
so a pedigree.
I would argue that they were not irregular, just unrecognized, right? Because, for example, and here's kind of an odd example, but for example, the Grand Lodge of Tennessee, I think it is. The Grand Lodge of Tennessee is not recognized by the Grand Lodge of California. However, the Grand Lodge of Tennessee is not irregular, right? They're just not recognized. And so,
according to California, they are, because that just means they have something they have to rectify. if they just clean up their house a little bit, they could become regular.
I guess.
You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, I still feel like there's a distinction between recognized, unrecognized, irregular, and clandestine. I feel like that's there's a spectrum there, you know?
So the way I've heard it described, and I like the way it sounds, is so regular is they are the same masonry as us, right? There may be slight differences, but no one doubt that, we've descended from the same lineage. Unrecognized, similarly, from what I've heard, we agree that their masonry is the same as us, but for whatever reason, we can't recognize them. And one example I've heard is like women masons in England.
Yes.
To be regular masons, but they're unrecognized because their masonry is almost identical from what I hear. Irregular would be that there is some division, they're descended from the same lineage usually, but there's something there that has created a schism, or that goes back, like in the case of Prince Hall, it goes back 2 centuries, that there were some differences there, which I'm glad to see that that's finally being worked out. And then clandestine is they are just off the wall. Who knows what the heck they do?
Yeah, basically any of the George G. Jones lodges that are, offshoots of the Prince Hall, where it's like the George G. Jones AF&AM, PHA, some sort of nonsense, Grand Lodges that show up all over. And so
right.
he's a great example of clandestine masonry. Got kicked out of Prince Hall. Started his own Grand Lodge. Okay.
And I started counting. I saw somebody's research. I lost count at over 20 clandestine lodges just in Texas.
Right.
And most of them are in Houston.
It's crazy.
Although there is one in Arlington.
That's bonkers.
Yeah. So I guess, the too long didn't read version would be recognized and regular, same as us. Unrecognized, same with us, but something's off there that we take issue with. Irregular is similar-ish, and then clandestine is, we don't know what the heck they do.
Yeah. So, and that's like, so the way that I always look at Prince Hall is that up until, up until about 7 years ago, they were regular but unrecognized, right? Because they were basically practicing the same masonry that we do. And now that brothers have had the opportunity to go back and forth between the two and confirm this, I mean, they were doing the same masonry. It just wasn't recognized as the same. So I would say they were unrecognized, not necessarily irregular. But, for example, I would say the Grand Orient of France is definitely irregular, but maybe not clandestine, right? Because the Grand Orient of France, they let in women. They also don't require a belief in God, that kind of thing. But they're not clandestine. They're the largest Grand Lodge system in France, and they have, I don't remember where their charter comes from. I might be talking out of my ass, but if I remember correctly, they have some decent lineage of some sort, so they're not clandestine. But.
Yeah, no, that was the way it's explained to me. I've done no research on it, but so I've heard they were regular, just good old Masons at one point, and then started, I think, went away with the God thing first, and then women, to where they could rectify that and become regular again.
Yeah. Well, and I like the example of the female-only lodges in England as being a great example of irregular Grand Lodges, where because the UGLE itself has gone out and said in all aspects except for the fact that its members are women, this is a regular lodge.
Yeah.
And so, but
well, and personally, I think just because we call a lodge irregular or unrecognized, or even clandestine, doesn't mean they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But it just dictates, I guess, what our communication with them would be.
Yeah, because it's one of those things like label versus reality. Because for a long time, according to the Grand Lodge of Texas, Prince Hall Masonry was clandestine. It was irregular, right? According to the Grand Lodge of Texas. Mm-hmm. However, the reality of the situation is it was just unrecognized. It's regular Masonry,
Yeah.
Now, things like I think Grand Orient of France might be irregular, right? But I still look towards the Grand Orient of France and organizations like Le Droit Humain, and I look at them and I really admire the work that they do. It's not my Masonry, but it's definitely some kind of Masonry, and that's okay. But that's my personal opinion. You guys don't have to buy into that. And by you guys, I also mean listeners.
The thing about it is you should have pride in the organization that you're a part of, but you shouldn't let your ego get out of hand and your pride mess with you into a sense that you put down other people that are trying to do good things. If it's a complete ripoff and just a pyramid scheme, well, maybe you should use a little bit of rhetoric to try to tear that down. Otherwise, let bygones be bygones. If they're out there changing the world for the better, sure, they're irregular, they're clandestine, whatever, but they're doing good works. Let it be, because the one that's really blowing and going is the one that's going to survive.
Yep.
Right.
So if we're worried about defending ourselves against other people that are trying to get in on our claim to fame, we're missing the boat, and they're going to pass us right up.
And so, Rhit, kind of the third question that I want to tack on to this, since we're already talking about recognized, unrecognized, irregular, regular, clandestine, whatever. We have one of the questions jotted down. I hear PHA Masonry, Prince Hall affiliated Masonry, referred to as clandestine all the time. Why all the confusion? And that question is pretty succinctly answered by the discussion we've just had. Is that a lot of people kind of maybe they're still kind of thinking in the same way that the Grand Lodge used to term Prince Hall Masonry. Grand Lodge used to look at Prince Hall Masonry as clandestine. It was kind of like you can't have more than one grand jurisdiction in one region, that kind of thing. Like a claim to territory, or maybe they just didn't want blacks in the fraternity, that kind of thing. But, so you still get people kind of looking at it from that perspective. Sometimes you have people that are hiding behind the mask of regularity, that they don't want black men in the fraternity. And so sometimes they hide under the guise of, they're irregular or they're clandestine. When really they have a very different problem with Prince Hall Masons, that kind of thing. But generally speaking, when you hear Prince Hall Masonry referred to as clandestine, be patient with this person. They may not understand that it's okay, that it's not clandestine, that it's actually regular and recognized, And we hopefully will soon have visitation. So I talked with a buddy of mine who is Prince Hall affiliated, and he said that they did vote in the affirmative just now to allow visitation. So once the state lodge of Texas votes to allow for visitation, then we'll have free visitation between the two groups. But we've recognized each other for almost a decade now. 7 years?
Pretty close. Yeah.
7 or 8 years now. So, hey,
now,
we're on the way there.
I do want to insert, there is a caveat here. If you're talking to someone who says that they're a Prince Hall Mason, you have to be sure that they're PHA and not PHO.
True. Yeah. Prince Hall origin is clandestine. Prince Hall affiliated is regular and recognized. Prince Hall origin is not. But that's a sort of different rabbit hole to jump down to. But basically, PHO is a split off of Prince Hall affiliated. It has its origins way back in the National Compact days, when all the Prince Hall affiliated lodges joined together in one giant national united Grand Lodge and then split apart. And then the PHO, Prince Hall origin, kind of exploded out of that, and they've been a problem in Prince Hall affiliated Masonry ever since then. So
yeah. No, and I think that the way that they have done this, the progression that they've done it has been wise, I should say. Because when we originally recognized them, we didn't have visitation at all. We recognized, and that really did seem like separate but equal. It's kind of weird. But almost immediately, within a few years, we came back, and I think Prince Hall initiated an ask, which is the way it's supposed to work. Younger asked the older lodge for visitation with a caveat, that we had to send in and get approval. And all of that was set up because we didn't know what a regular lodge in Prince Hall was. They weren't in our books. So if they came and visit, you couldn't look in the list of lodges regular and say, okay, you're good to come in. So we had to have a checks and balances. And B, we had no idea what their dues card looked like. So if you came and flashed a Prince Hall dues card that's PHA, I wouldn't know that from a PHO. So all of that had to be worked out. And now that they've got all that ironed out, Prince Hall's come back again to where we just ask for good old regular visitation.
Now, I do think there was something that was especially good about the process that they had before, where it had to go between grand secretaries, is that a Prince Hall Mason, if they show up and the lodge has already voted to let them in, they cannot be kept out by having three brothers protest.
Yes, absolutely. That was something that we had to remedy the year after we approved that. But with that special compact, you couldn't refuse entry. I'm pretty sure what Grand Lodge law says is that anyone from another jurisdiction, 3 Master Masons can protest their entrance and they can't come in. If they are a AF and AEM Grand Lodge of Texas Mason, I don't know that you can refuse their entry.
Well, yeah, but I feel like it was very specifically designed to do one thing and one thing only.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, because technically they are from another jurisdiction, although we share states, which is something that needs to be corrected in our Constitution. They were technically from another jurisdiction, so that rule would be in play. So they amended Grand Lodge law to say, hey, if you have a special compact with another jurisdiction, you can't refuse entry, which we had with Prince Hall. So your chance to, if you didn't want any visitors from Prince Hall, your chance was at the vote when that was put up to the whole lodge. And I, as much as I didn't like it, I thought it was good because for me, paramount is peace and harmony in a lodge. Right. And if I'm not welcome from one brother there, I really don't want to be there to cause discontent, We're trying to do good in the world, not cause strife to where eventually I know it's going to happen, whether they like it or not. It may not happen at their lodge, but what's the right word? Visitation, because I don't want to say integration, because I don't ever believe the two will become one.
And that's okay.
No, and that was the big fear because I was around before we recognized them, and everybody's like, well, they're scared because we're going to take all their members. And it was vice versa on the other side. And it's like, man, that's silly. We're so much the same, but so different at the same time. I mean, if you look into Prince Hall's history, it is so rich and just so inspiring with how that all transpired. You wouldn't feel right letting that go. And same thing here on our side. Yeah, our fraternity has such a rich history that we're going to want to perpetuate that.
Yeah, the only thing that I could ever see occurring, and this is snowball's chance in hell. The only thing that I could ever see occurring would be some sort of united Grand Lodge where each one still has like a provincial Grand Master, right? And from the pool of past provincial Grand Masters, you elect a united district Grand Master, kind of like how they have in England, kind of how they have in Germany. Germany has, I think, 5 Grand Lodges. Right. Yeah. All together, India has, And then India doesn't have a united Grand Lodge, but India's like us, where they have a provincial Grand Lodge of England. They have a provincial Grand Lodge of Ireland, one from Scotland. They have one from India. You have 4 Grand Lodges there operating in coexistence. They're not united, so they're kind of like us. Or you might see something like Germany, where it's 5 distinct Grand Lodges all operating under one united banner, but they're still distinct.
Right, with very different rituals too.
Yes. But I think it's going to be much more like India rather than Germany, where we have Grand Lodges operating in parallel as opposed to anything united. All right, guys, it's been a pretty good discussion. So with that, I'd like to give you guys the Fraternal Quote of the week. And if I can get my papers in order, this week's Fraternal Quote is short. The true Mason takes full responsibility for the condition of his character and ever strives for its perfection. That's by Brother William Howard Taft, 27th President of the United States. Gentlemen, closing thoughts on tonight's episode, as varied as the subject matter has been.
I think, there's so much to know. I think this kind of points that out. There is so much information out there to know that just keep your ear to the track and keep learning.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great conversation. I'm encouraged by the upcoming vote with Prince Hall. I think there is a lot to be learned from our differences that will just make it an even richer fraternity. So I'm kind of stoked about that.
100%. We're going to make history at Grand Lodge. So be there.
Yeah. As far as the upcoming vote goes, I am actually more than the Grand Lodge vote. I'm more excited about, and I'm sorry guys, I'm leaving Blue Lodge here in the dust, but I'm even more excited about intervisitation between the York Rite bodies of Prince Hall affiliated chapters, councils, and commanderies, and AF and AM chapters, councils, and commanderies, because I really want to see Prince Hall's version of the Order of the Temple.
That's a great point, though. I mean, wow.
I'm very excited. I hope that they pass intervisitation in the York Rite bodies as well. I'm super psyched about the whole thing. We'll see how it goes. But as far as I know that Rhit says he strives for peace and harmony, and I totally support him in that. I kind of go with the targeted strife and targeted disharmony. I'm very much a fan of the idea of, if there is a brother within your midst that objects to your being there because of the color of your skin, or because the pronunciation of your last name, or however it may be, I fully believe that some disharmony is absolutely in order. Because in order to work towards greater harmony, we have to have a little bit of disharmony to work out the kinks first. Not to knock Rhit's approach to it or anything like that.
No, don't get me wrong. I love throwing elbows every once in a while.
But yeah, no, I get what you're talking about. But I'm very much on team organized chaos. But guys, it's been good. So if you want to contact us, you can reach us at www.fortworth148.org. We are at Fort Worth Lodge 148 on Facebook. Our email is info@fortworth148.org. If you live in the 64th District of the Grand Lodge of Texas and you want to promote an event, please reach out to them at 64th.org. That's 64th.org.
Yeah, if you got questions, shoot them to us. Most of you guys are friends with us on Facebook. If not, just reach out like Gabe said. We'll roundtable that sucker.
Yep. Holiday roundtable.
All right, I guess we're ready to shut this thing down then?
Yep.
Here we go. This is Rhit Moore signing off.
This is Billy Hamilton signing off.
And this is Gabriel Jagush signing off.